exit. So today's topic, Power Platform Governance, why it's mission critical. Well, this is a topic that's really dear to me. Back in 2018, when I was a global admin in the state of North Carolina and Power Platform was launched officially, I had lots of questions and concerns. I remember meeting with my team members going, how are we going to deploy this thing securely? How are we going to organize it? It just seems like the Wild West with people creating their own apps and their own environments. Well, what I can tell you now is that platform has come a long way and is still evolving, but Microsoft has now addressed all of my concerns by integrating the security of the Power Platform into my M365 security stack, as well as providing tools for a governance framework. So today, that's what we're going to be talking about. That's what this is all about, and we'll address each of these items and more. This is your session today, so make sure you ask questions. Please chime in, raise a hand, give a thumbs up if you like something that you hear, or just chat a question into the chat window. We would love to make this as interactive as possible. I know we got a couple questions in advance, so we will definitely be answering those also as they come up. But first, what I'd like to do, as you can see the agenda, we're going to talk about why it's important. We've got to get the agenda out of the way. The organizational approach. How should your organization think about launching these services? What is the center of excellence? If you've never heard that before, this is a big takeaway today that you're going to want to listen about. The security controls that are already in place and what's coming, because I think that's really cool. There's some great new security controls that we're going to be talking about today. And then if you missed our Fall Ignite recap, on the Power Platform specifically, we'll talk about those just for a quick second at the very end, but we want to make sure we have plenty of time at the end for additional questions. So we have a full agenda today, so let's get started with a poll question. So Casey, if you can go ahead and launch the poll. First question is are you currently using the Power Platform? No, we're kind of waiting for governance to be put in place first. Yes, but with maybe little governance in place possibly. Or yes, with governance, we've already thought this thing through and we got a good handle on it. So if you can go ahead and submit your results, and we'll come back to this in a few seconds. It looks like we're still getting some results. 100% yes, with little to no governance. 75% yeah, it just keeps climbing. So people understand that there's probably a need, but and then there's also a bunch of no's as well. So this is constantly changing. So we're kind of all over the place, right? And obviously, I think the reason why you're all here today is to understand why it's important, what you can do about it from an organizational, from a security perspective. So let's dive right into it. The poll results will keep going on, and we'll have other polls throughout this webinar today. So first of all, Jimmy, the first topic is why is it mission critical? I mentioned some of my concerns at the beginning of this webinar, but in your opinion, what are the major issues for just leaving? What if you just left Power Platform available out of the box and did nothing, which I think a lot of people may or may not be aware that there could be some potential issues. Jimmy, what do you think?
Yeah, Ken, absolutely. And to get started, first things here and to get it out of the way is data loss prevention. And that's number one, is really that the Power Platform and specifically Power Automate has out of the box over 380 connectors. And so those connectors are connectors that are used to connect different apps and services, not just the Microsoft services like SharePoint and Exchange, but additionally, there's third-party connectors available also. There's even a Twitter connector, believe it or not. So depending on whether you're commercial or GCC, that kind of changes which connectors are out of the box enabled for the tenant. But you do want to be able to govern and control that data and how users and makers that are building things like Power Automate Cloud Flows and Canvas apps and model-driven apps, and how they're able to connect to that data and which environments and makers are allowed to do what with what kind of data within the organization. Additionally, there's custom connectors. So there's an entire wizard. And if the 380 aren't enough, any organization can go and build their own custom connectors to virtually any app that provides a modern web API. And so that could be anything from homegrown internal applications to other, third-party applications that aren't identified or don't have a pre-built connector for Power Automate. And so an example of this is that a user inside operating in an environment that doesn't have any sort of data loss prevention policy in place for the Power Platform tenant in an ungoverned environment, back to your question, that user might be able to access with their own permissions, as they should be able to within their job role, certain SQL databases. But because they're using the Power Platform and within that environment, they also have access to all the other connectors. So they could, in theory and accidentally or inadvertently, expose data from the organization to something like SharePoint or to a shared spreadsheet or to virtually any other app or service that's available. And so Microsoft does have a data policy center in the admin center for the Power Platform where those connectors can be governed. And it's really important to take note of that and also to apply data policies and procedures. So that way there are no kind of rogue connections or accidental connections or inadvertent data leaks with the organization's data, because the Power Automate and Power Platform really can stitch together almost every connected application within the org. And so you really want to make sure that there's a policy in place. And not only that, but then also in good governance, you also would want to go and be able to monitor and report who's connecting to what and which environments are making use of those connectors as well. And so that's another additional layer. You can get a little bit of that out of the admin center out of the box, but as we'll talk about later when we get into the Center of Excellence, we'll see that in a much deeper dive as to what's available, and we'll speak to some of the other data loss prevention policies.
Hold on one second, Jimmy. So I think that's one thing that I've noticed since 2018 when I first started looking at this. You had your business connectors and you had your non-business connectors. Pretty much business was anything Microsoft related, non-business was everything else. And it was very, rigid one way or the other. You couldn't really, focus it in on one environment. I think we're going to talk more about that later, so I want to save that, but I want to just say that that is absolutely crucial, right? Setting up your DLP is probably one of the first things that you want to do as far as how you can handle those connectors.
Yeah, absolutely. If you take nothing away from today's talk, that's why it's the very first bullet point here, is to really get in there and set up some DLP policies for the tenant at the environment or at the tenant level, and make sure that you hone that in and that you have those connectors set up in a way that's going to work best for you. Absolutely.
One other thing there, Jimmy, right? That DLP is not the same DLP policies that you create for your Exchange and your email and OneDrive, right? That's being done in the Power Platform Admin Center.
Correct. This is a complete standalone area of the Power Platform Admin Center that it's isolated from those other DLP policies which you might have in other areas of the Microsoft Office experience. 100%. Yep, for sure. And then the second thing here is, in going back to the ungoverned, an ungoverned tenant might have the potential for process breakdowns and outages. And this has a lot to do with orphans and ownership, and then also resources that might not be following certain protocols in place for your organization. But what that means and what an orphan is there could be certain applications or Power Automate cloud flows that are created by IT managers or other makers or other leaders in different areas of the agencies and departments within the organization that have gone in and discovered, some of the features of the Power Platform and built some things or some automations that are helping facilitate workflows day to day within the business. And unfortunately, that all those resources, they could have the risk of becoming ownerless if that individual decides to change departments, if their licensing changes, or for some reason they decide to leave the organization, or their password policy comes up and they reset, or their connectors, for some reason they start to no longer have access to certain connectors. Back to bullet point number 1, that start to become governed. You could run into potential process breakdowns and outages with those Canvas apps, model-driven apps, or Power Automate cloud flows that are running under the context of a user within the organization instead of, let's say, something like the service account. So you want to be able to avoid that. And so in an ungoverned tenant, you really have no visibility into that. If you're not tracking it, you might not know when those things start to happen. And the next thing you know, you have a group of users who all of a sudden their workflow is interrupted, and certain functionality that was happening or certain automations that were happening in the background are no longer operating as expected. And now there has to be a whole investigation into what happened and also a way to kind of fix and amend that situation. Where a governed tenant, you most likely will have a way of controlling that and also to monitor and report on that as well, and identify any kind of rogue resources or any kind of orphans would surface up almost immediately. Especially when we get into the Center of Excellence, that's something that happens it's a really robust tool to kind of tackle that situation, for sure. And then speaking down to the integrating and the change management and deployments. So we often, talk about how the Power Platform is a no-code and low-code solution, how people can go and click, drag, drop, and build, Canvas apps, model-driven apps, integrate things with Teams, use Power Automate. It's got a lot of great features and it doesn't require a lot of coding involved. However, something that is still available, Microsoft provides a great set of best practices and tools for, is solutions and a way to encapsulate and control and move and transition changes into different environments within the Power Platform. And so out of the box, the Power Platform usually has a default environment, but you're not really limited into how many environments that you create in the Power Platform. It's more limited on space and capacity. So a lot of times it's a best practice or a good approach to have a development environment and a test environment and a production environment for certain groups of applications, whether that's for the organization as a whole or within different agencies or departments that have a heavy usage of different specific applications just for them. And so you really want to have a way to move changes throughout to be able to test those changes and provide developers a sandbox in order to be able to play around and deploy their things. And a great part of governance also involves including the Power Platform with any existing change management practices that you might already have. And so you might have a weekly or semi-weekly or a set routine change management council that meets and approves changes to move across for existing applications or other areas of the organization. And there's really no reason that the Power Platform could not be included into those same procedures and policies that are in place. Another point here is to be able to support and grow makers' skills and abilities. And so this really falls under nurturing, which I'll talk about quite a bit here throughout the day, throughout our session. But you want to be able to support the makers' skills and abilities within the organization. Also, new people and new individuals might join your organization or different departments as they shuffle around and change jobs who might have a good set of skills or have experience with the Power Platform in creating Power Automate or Cloud Flows or Canvas apps or model-driven apps. And so you want to be able to identify and support them and their skills and abilities, and also provide a pathway for them to request the resources that they need in order to be able to build what they want to build and improve their day-to-day workloads and improve their team's workflows as well. And so good governance will really give them the tools and a pathway and a procedure for requesting those, as well as be able to monitor and track what they're creating and what they're doing throughout the organization as they're working. And then additionally, policy and procedure isn't enough. This last bullet point here is about monitoring. So you can have all the best rules and guidelines, for everyone to follow, but you also need a way to be able to observe the tenant as a whole, to be able to observe the environments and observe different components, both from the resources that are getting created and being utilized, connectors, cloud flows, apps, but also be able to look at individuals and see, who's building what, who's building the most stuff, and be able to identify those, as well as bubbling up and surfacing, back to the second bullet point, anything that's orphaned or ownerless that might not have an owner, or maybe you'll notice things that with good monitoring that you need to see. Maybe a service account should be used as a best practice instead of a specific user, instead of running under the context of a manager. So we fall into monitoring as well. And so with an ungoverned platform, it's really kind of the Wild West as far as data loss, but as well as all these other benefits that you get by implementing a really good governance plan.
That's right, Jimmy. So the goal for today is really to show you that there are security controls to put in place. There are organizational best practices, and that's what we're talking about today. If you look back at the poll that we just did, only 7% said they were using Power Platform with governance. So good for those 7%. And I hope that the folks that are still on the fence about deploying Power Platform or are afraid to deploy it, that they come out of this session today with lots of capabilities and a better understanding about how it can be controlled. So when we look at this next poll, and Casey, go ahead and launch this next poll. What are your biggest concerns? Knowing what Jimmy just said, what are your biggest concerns using the Power Platform? And I think this is probably a no-brainer, but I think the answer is going to be all of the above, right? Not understanding how to get started offering this service from an organizational standpoint, support calls, because now all of a sudden everybody in the world has the ability to create an app. The security of data is obviously is a concern. So I think the results will come back all the above, but we'll see how they go. But the good news is we have answers for you all. So we're going to go on to the next slide as we wait for the results to come in. Jimmy, so what should an organization do to allow users to access and build Power Apps and Power Automates, but still control the data to their environments? You kind of hinted on it a little bit, but if you could talk about that a little bit. And then we also had a question that came in advance that we'll wait till the very end.
All right. Yeah, sounds great, Ken. Yeah, first off is to define goals and expectations. And so every organization is going to be unique, and every agency and department within the organization is also going to have unique needs that need to be handled and to be dovetailed into the governance plan. So it's really important to define those goals. And even if you have a more step approach to implementing governance, to be able to set that up for success ahead of time and to be able to really express those to individuals within the organization of what your plans are to do, not just explaining what the Power Platform is and how can they make best use of it, but also what the goals of the organization is to be able to control and govern that platform as well. Another thing that you want to do is document all the existing environments and resources. So a lot of times we get into governance projects at Planet, and there's a bit of a surprise when we go into the tenant and we see that there's already environments that maybe some people weren't even aware that were there. Some Teams environments, a couple of Teams apps here and there. Maybe there's some Canvas apps that have been built or model-driven apps in the default environment, which technically probably shouldn't be there depending on the reasoning. But what you do want to do is get in and document what's there and what exists today. And this also provides you a pathway to get started with identifying action items during the implementation of your governance and finding ownerless apps and flows or apps and flows that might be better owned or executed under the context of a service account rather than an individual, as well as apps that are created in the wrong environment, which I touched on just a moment ago. There's also the possibility that there's automations that are running kind of rogue, or maybe they're duplicative or not needed. So you really want to get in and do a full documentation of what you have today. And this also allows you to then identify active makers. As you start to see these artifacts that exist in your Power Platform during that documentation exercise, most likely you'll identify some of the people that are building things and start to build a list of the people that need to be communicated to about upcoming changes, especially if you're implementing governance. You're going to make changes to connectors and to maybe how Power Automate functions for them. You definitely want to list and start to identify those individuals so you can bring them into the fold and work with them to make sure that their apps are functioning. And they might even have additional features that they are aware of that they could be making better use of as well. And so that's really important to know who's building in your Power Platform tenant, absolutely, but then also to be able to bring them into the fold of the governance plan when you get ready to start to execute that. And so that way you can keep that communication pathway open and kind of really embrace the platform together. Another thing is that you want to use a service account for administrative apps and flows. I've kind of mentioned this a lot in a lot of the slides up until now, but what this is a service principal user or administrative account that can run in the context and kind of handle these applications and flows. And then you don't have to worry about an individual and actual human users permissions changing or security change or a licensing change, or maybe they leave the organization for some reason. You don't have to worry about those things starting to become orphaned. So it really reduces the chance of those orphan situations happening, as well as, for these administrative apps and flows that are supposed to kind of run in perpetuity or for a very long time within the organization. You don't want any disruptions in those services. So that's why that's kind of a best practice and a bullet point here. And then I have a final bullet point that's just, apply best practices, but it's really general term. There's a lot of best practices in the Power Platform, and this is really just to get you thinking about that. Some examples are app environments and solutions. And so I talked about that a little bit earlier, but the Power Platform really has a lot of foundational tools available that Microsoft gives, both in the admin center and within the environments and in the application making and Power Automate making experience. And that has to do with packaging components together in solutions, the ability to have multiple environments such as dev, UAT, and production, and just knowing when an unmanaged solution versus a managed solution should be used to promote code or to promote changes across those environments. You just really want to try to refine that and make sure that those are being followed and applied throughout your experience with the Power Platform in general. So really just kind of a bullet point to get you thinking about that.
Okay. And so, when you're talking about identifying your active makers, there's some ways to control that. Specifically, like there's some decisions to be made. Are you going to allow teams owners to be able to use Dataverse, which as soon as you do that, right, then you start creating all these environments like you just said, and now you have 100 environments that you weren't even aware that were set up because that Dataverse in Teams now requires an environment. So controlling that, thinking that through, what are you going to allow? How are you going to roll that out? How are you going to give that permission out? Is it by exception? Is it by business case? It's not just let the Wild West happen, right? It's proactive change control is what we're talking about there.
Yep, absolutely, 100%.
There was a question that came in over the chat that says, are there recommendations if service accounts are not allowed? I think you explained the reason why you want to use a service account, but what are your thoughts about that, Jimmy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't yet ran into a situation where I've been in where service accounts are not allowed. So I think first I wonder, and kind of re-ask like, why aren't service accounts allowed? What's the policy around that? And that might open up identifying reasons why. If it's for MFA reasons, there are almost everything I believe now is supported for multi-factor authentication. So you can have an MFA-based service account that would be able to function. That's just like my gut instinct reaction is the only reason I can think of why MFA wouldn't, or why service accounts wouldn't be allowed, but there should be a policy to enable that. It's really a best practice and guideline for Microsoft, especially for those administrative apps and flows to run in the context of one. My next thing would be not allowed per DoD policy. Gotcha. I guess it would be to run under an administrator or administrative account would be my fallback for that. That's definitely something where I think that we would have to noodle on and work more. And it's really where we would get into more of an engagement approach. When Planet engages a client with governance, usually it's a really in-depth, and we really try to understand the organization and its unique needs. Specifically, this is a great example of that. Towards the end, I'm even going to make a mention that every governance plan is unique, just like every organization is unique. So you'll hear me say that again later. But that really gets into the execution, and there is there's no one-size-fits-all solution for governance. Really, what we try to do is give the best guidelines to follow for that. But in that specific situation, I think that there'd probably be not just one, but probably several meetings to resolve and identify and understand what the best approach would be. I'm sorry I don't have a more direct answer for that.
It's a good question, though, and we can certainly dig into it maybe with our compliance team. So question for you, if you had to summarize, I know this question came in advance, and we always love to get questions in advance from the registration form, so please do that when you register for these webinars. The question is how to best handle environment and application sprawl in Power Platform, and you could just summarize kind of what your thoughts are about that.
Yep, absolutely. So, and this goes into if there's existing sprawl, an existing environment and app sprawl, it would be identifying and grouping those into a way that's more logical and fitting for the business. So agencies and departments, depending on how those apps live, the key here is to use solutions and really start to group those applications and the resources into solutions that make logical sense, and then also into environments where they make logical sense also. And so for an example, if I had, 3 different departments and each one had their own set of makers and their own set of model-driven apps or Canvas apps or Power Automate flows, it would be to identify what functionality those had and then to make a logical solution within the Power Platform admin environment, and then bring those resources into that solution in a development environment, and then export that solution managed into a test or UAT environment, and then also into production environment, both as a managed solution in both those cases. So really wrangling things together and sorting them out in a way that's logical, and then encapsulating them within solutions. And solutions is really the key takeaway here. Solutions are like buckets that you can use to wrap different resources in the Power Platform environment together to where they make sense. And it's kind of a way to really group and control things. And that dovetails beautifully into change management. And so that's if you're dealing with an existing sprawl situation. To be proactive is just to really set up policies and procedures to follow those same guidelines when you're starting from scratch or when you're starting to apply governance into your tenant.
Yeah, I would say the last thing you want to do is give out the maker role indiscriminately, right? So really have a reason why you're giving out that maker role and control who can create those environments, because they do power for all the global admins out there or Power Platform admins, they do take up tenant resources. There is specific storage that has to be purchased for those environments, and it has to be purchased separately if you start exceeding what's available in the tenant. So definitely be aware of environmental sprawl and how you give out environments. All right, let's move on. Just make sure keeping an eye on the clock here. So Jimmy, what stumbling blocks have you seen implementing the Center of Excellence? Talk a little bit about the Center of Excellence and why it is such a great framework for people who are looking at deploying Power Platform.
Yep, absolutely. So one of the big stumbling blocks, and one that Microsoft addresses right away when you're starting to get into the deployment, is that you need to have access to the audit logs, and audit logging needs to be set up and turned on, not just for the Power Platform, but for the entire global tenant itself, for the Microsoft tenant. So that account, that service account, hopefully, but that administrative account that's setting up and deploying your Center of Excellence needs to be able to access and have access to those audit logs that exist. There's full documentation on the deployment for the COE that kind of really explains how you can test this and how you can verify that it's working. It also helps to have a really good fundamental knowledge of the Power Platform, specifically Power Automate and Cloud Flows, but in general, the Power Platform itself, in having knowledge of Canvas apps, model-driven apps, and Power Automate. And the reason I say that is because the Center of Excellence is actually built using the Power Platform. And so it comes with a collection of applications, both Canvas and model-driven, that help govern it, as well as it makes heavy usage of Power Automate and Cloud Flows. And that's where I really emphasize that that can be a really big stumbling block, is setting up those Power Automate and Cloud Flows and being able to understand when they've executed successfully, and also to be able to troubleshoot any situations where they might fail. And they do fail sometimes when you're rolling out the Center of Excellence. It's not uncommon to have one or two connections that might not be available to the account that's installing it, as well as sometimes in a recent case in December, I was rolling out the Center of Excellence and some of the Power Automate Cloud Flows were misconfigured with the page ignition. So when Microsoft was building this, one of the solution files that was imported, the page ignition settings were wrong on a multitude of Dataverse blocks inside one of the cloud flows or several of the cloud flows. And I, having knowledge of the Power Platform and Power Automate specifically, was able to go in and make corrections to those cloud flows and then have it execute without any further need. That's definitely a falling down point. If you don't have a lot of knowledge of that, you might end up having to put some tickets in for support or working with someone to help you get over those hurdles that can come up. There's also a series of Power Automate Cloud Flows which have to complete successfully before the next one can execute. And so it's really important to be able to have execute and exercise patience, as well as to be able to follow the instructions that are available for setting it up and installing it. For sure. Now, I don't want to scare you too far away from that, because the Center of Excellence is absolutely amazing, and what it offers is as a starting point for your governance. And some of those benefits are administrative apps. So it comes out of the box with a full admin app center for the Power Platform administrators to be able to use to govern the tenant itself. It also comes with an app that allows users to request resources from Power Platform admins. So individuals who do fall into that maker role that Ken mentioned a moment ago, if they want an environment for something, if they need access to a specific connector, if they have a request for a resource, there's an application that provides a pathway to control and monitor and organize those requests, and also to approve and execute them. It also comes with a very robust DLP manager. And so out of the box, the Power Platform tenant itself does have in the admin center a DLP management area where you can set up your DLP policies, and you should absolutely do that to be able to control data and reduce data loss within your organization 100%. But as a bonus, the Center of Excellence comes with an additional application which just aids and alleviates and makes it a little bit easier to control those DLP policies, as well as provide insights into them when new environments are added or when new DLP policies need to be provisioned or edited. So it's a really nice application that comes with it. And then my favorite part of the Center of Excellence is the reporting, and that's where it can be really challenging to think about how you're going to monitor your Power Platform tenant, the Center of Excellence answers that question with a really robust, nice set of reports that all makes use of Power BI and connectors. And so, and one of the key things about the Center of Excellence reporting is that it's longer than 28 days. So if you've been in the Power Platform Admin Center, if you've never been in there, but you decide to go in after our call today, a lot of what you see in the logs and the activity and the capacity and the usage and the analytics within the Admin Center of the Power Platform is only 28 days long. And there's no history past that that you really have easy access into. The reporting with the Center of Excellence gives you long captured history from the moment that it's installed, as well as it will aggregate previous history using those global audit logs, which I mentioned in the very beginning of our Center of Excellence section, that installer needs access to. And that's why the person or the account that's being used to set up the Center of Excellence needs access to those global logs, the global audit log for the entire office tenant, is because then it can go in and build that telemetry and build out that history when it starts to surface out the reports that come with it. The reports will report all the way down to the geographical detail and location-based usage of where things are executing at. So you can see where certain apps are launched from, where different Power Automates are launched from geographically. And it's both component and user-based. So not only can you go and look and say, okay, I want to see all the connectors that are in usage. I want to see all the Power Automate flows that are running. It'll also identify and service individuals of who's running the most flows, of who's creating the most flows, of who's creating the most Canvas apps. So you really get two directions of reporting at the individual and human level and account level, as well as licensing auditing abilities and accessibility. And you also get it across the components that make up the Power Platform as well: Canvas apps, model-driven apps, reports, and Power Automate. So it really gives you both directions of reporting, and it's extremely robust. Absolutely my favorite part. And then the last kind of core pillar of the Center of Excellence is the nurture component. And this gives makers the ability to enter in assessments on different resources that they request, and also to put down assessment notes and details for Power Platform administrators to review, and so they can get an assessment about those different applications, model-driven apps, and Canvas apps that are being created. It also comes with a template catalog with a whole bunch of different templates that makers can use to get started. And then once they provision and execute those templates, they can then hone them in, tweak them, customize them, and make them their own. And it reduces a lot of the boilerplate setup when creating different resources in the Power Platform. And then it also has a training center, which allows administrators to offer training in a day. So there's some packaged training in a day classes that can be put together by the Power Platform admin team at your organization, where maybe they'll do a lightweight, hey, let's use Power Automate and Cloudflow to connect, to SharePoint today. And it'll be a workshop of 1 to 2 hours. The Training in a Day app really lets you group those individuals together and allows them to register for that internal class that you could set up. So it's a really great way to nurture and foster talent, as well as to express different updates with the platform as Microsoft continues to release changes and updates into Power Automate and different other tools. Those changes can then be communicated to all the people that are making use of the nurture components as well. So it's a great way to keep people up to speed about features and functionality and improve what they've already created.
Awesome information, Jimmy. So again, this is not something that's This is not something that's built into the Power Platform administration site today. I don't know what the plans are moving forward, but certainly it's something that you have to go out and get. And we've given you links at the end of this presentation. I think was also in the newsletter. So definitely go out and check it out. It's not perfect, but again, it really does provide a great governance framework for you to start building upon and having control over those environments, and possibly even like the approval process for the requesting environments and everything else. So it's a great set of tools, all wrapped up into a deployment package that then gets built into the Power Platform as an environment. So let's keep an eye on the clock here. Let's take a look at what it actually looks like, Jimmy. So do you have to install the whole COE, the Center of Excellence, at once, or talk us through what it looks like and how you do it?
Yeah, so what we're looking here is at the dashboard. This is a Power BI dashboard, and it's full of all the reporting, which I mentioned earlier was my favorite feature of the Center of Excellence. You'll see that they kind of have things grouped into 3 core pillars of monitoring, governing, and nurturing. And you don't have to install everything all at once. So when you go to the Center of Excellence links that we do provide, you'll see that Microsoft does have it set up so you can piecemeal it together or tackle it in a multi-phased approach. And so this is really the launching place of a fully installed Center of Excellence. But again, you wouldn't necessarily need to set up all the components right away. You can start to bring things on as long as you set up the core one first, for sure. And so we'll see a list of different reports down the left-hand side, as well as different ways to launch specific applications that come with the Center of Excellence in the center. And again, this is a Power BI report, and the Center of Excellence is built fully on the Power Platform. So with some experience and with some understanding of Power BI or Canvas and model-driven apps, you can start to fully configure and customize this to be your own. You might have your own homegrown app for people to request resources, or you might have a specific app that offers some additional granular features or detail about specific needs or usage. And you can start to bring those in and start to kind of make this your own once it's set up.
Excellent, excellent. So let's take one more slide on this, I believe. Yep. So can you customize the COE to meet your needs, Jimmy?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, jumped ahead of that one a little bit there. Sorry about that. But yeah, you can absolutely customize it to meet your needs, not just on the reporting level, but on the application level. And so you might have a certain application that comes with the Center of Excellence, like the requesting resources, where maybe there needs to be some additional fields or forms that need to be filled out. There's no reason you can't extend that application and start to enhance and add those in and really make it your own. This report that we're looking at kind of speaks to what I talked about a moment ago with the governance reporting. This is one of my favorite reports, but it gives you an overview, not just the geographical information, but also there's a breakdown horizontally across the top. It might be a little bit hard to read, but that's all bucketed by different resource groups of components that make up the Power Platform. So you get an overview. You can see environments, apps, flows, custom connectors, connections, and then makers. And on this first screen, you can really see in the top app maker list who's making what. And so this becomes really good to be able to monitor the users. And you might see somebody in here you haven't seen before, and then, oh, maybe they have the maker role and they shouldn't have it. Or, maybe they're an experienced, maker in the Power Platform. You can start to bring them into the fold and offer them certain features, or offer them, and identify those users and get out in front of that and really work with that team. And so it's really useful in that. In this case, we have Megan Brown up there with 198 apps. And, coincidentally, this is totally not filler for the talk, but on Monday, on the 31st, Microsoft's offering a free Power Platform fundamentals class that's 2 or 3 hours long. I'm signed up for it. I don't know if there's open seats left, but there's no reason we couldn't go down this list and, find those individuals and then send them a blast, let them know that, hey, there's additional training that's for free that Microsoft is rolling out some new features, and you can check it out and make use of it. So it really becomes a really cool tool to be able to go out and look around the different areas of your application. You also see there's 2 blank app makers there with 2 apps. So that really is identifying from the bottom in the center of the screen that there's 2 orphaned apps out there, which falls back to the original slide that we started off with about an ungoverned tenant. Without this report, you might not know that there's 2 applications that don't have an owner right now. And so, that's a potential, break the situation, potential outage, or, a potential issue in the future that whoever owns this report needs to maybe get on top of and figure out why there's 2 apps without an owner.
Awesome. So you mentioned some training. Again, Planet also provides a app in a day training, or a customized training as well. So if you're interested in that, let us know. Let's move on to security now and talk a little bit about, these were announcements, I believe, last April. I think they were just starting to roll out around the November timeframe. Talk a little about some of these new latest capabilities with data connections and Power Platform that was announced.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really cool. And so I mentioned earlier that there's 380 connectors for Power Automate out of the box. Plus, you can build your own custom connectors to connect to virtually any application that has a web API. When you do that, you define actions. And so, for example, in SharePoint, you might have the SharePoint connector has actions to update a list, to be able to read a list, and to be able to make use of that data. And so these new granular DLP controls in the Power Platform give you the ability to govern connector actions and not just the connectors. So in the past, where you might have to block SharePoint because you might not want people writing to that data list or to that data store and be able to insert data into SharePoint, now you could have an environment that has the ability to read that data from SharePoint, but not be able to insert or update it. And so with the granular DLP controls, you really get into be able to define at a very deep granular level the connectors at the action. And so that gives you the ability to say, oh, you can, for the SQL connector, you could have it so where a person who's working in development might need to read data from a certain SQL database, but no means that person should ever be able to update any of the rows or records inside that table. With this DLP control, you could limit that connector and give that environment that that maker is using the read-only ability, and then you could block the write ability on that connector. So it's really powerful, and it's really exciting that they've been able to do this. It allows you to bifurcate the connectors in an even deeper level and allow in where you might have to block people and kind of say no and disappoint some folks. Now you can really say, oh, you know what? Now I can turn this one part of the connector on without having to give you access to the entire connector and all of its actions. So it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, that's huge, because in the past, like you said, if you turned on a connector, it wasn't based on read write, it was everything, right? So
yeah,
just that for all these applications that just need to read data in, right? That's perfect for that situation.
Yep, exactly. So now it's no longer an all or nothing. You don't have to play the no card as much. Hopefully, you can kind of give people what they need, and that's exciting. Yep. And then the other is to update data policy features. And so inside the data policy, and this kind of falls into DLP as well, now you can block domains and endpoints, which this is a new feature for the DLP management of the admin center of the Power Platform. So if you had specific SQL Server IP addresses, or there were certain web service endpoints that you didn't want people to be able to access on the tenant or the environment level, now you can block those. And so an example of this might be a web API under a certain domain that you don't want users to be able to create custom connectors for. And, there might be, some creative maker out there who, decides, oh, well, I know the connector is blocked, but I can make my own custom connector and still get by. This allows you to really enforce that policy and block that endpoint completely, as well as to limit, if there's a server IP address for a specific SQL server that people shouldn't be connecting to using Power Automate, you can start to make a blocking list of those as well at the tenant or at the environment level. So again, it's just more control over what's happening and more control over the data.
Especially if you have some very highly sensitive data sets out there that you definitely don't want people touching. There's no reason for them to touch it. This is what you'd use for that, right?
Yep.
Excellent. All right, so we're pretty much at the end. I wanted to definitely leave some time for the end, but we're going to have one last poll. Hopefully we did our objective today, which was show you how you can secure Power Platform, show you how you can control the organizational rollout of Power Platform. So Casey, if you could just go ahead and launch this last poll. That would be great. And at this point in time, we've got one other slide just to recap what we did at Ignite, but I'm certainly want to open it up to questions first before we do that. So if there's questions right now, raise a hand, come off mute, just go ahead and ask your question in the chat, whatever you'd like. I'll pause for a few seconds here while we're doing the poll. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, so while we're still waiting for some questions and we have a few minutes left, I just want to recap some of the big Ignited announcements in November. First off, there was the big pay-as-you-go release as far as Power Platform. Before it used to be per app, per user. Now it's a pay-as-you-go. It's a monthly consumption type of situation. So the pay-as-you-go licensing, it seems like Microsoft is really trying to find the sweet price and the sweet spot still for Power Platform pricing. Already the licenses costs were cut in half last year, but the pay-as-you-go licensing is based on 2 meters. Basically, it's a per app meter that tracks unique users per month, and you only get charged for unique users per month. I think it's like $10 a user per app per month. And then the second meter that gets charged is you get automatically you get 1 gigabyte of file storage and another storage, and the data when you link it to your Azure subscription. So you do need an Azure subscription to use the pay-as-you-go solution. It's similar. You're seeing this theme also in Power BI, where it's it's a per monthly user type of fee. So I think we're seeing more of that. Again, it's going to be built in Azure. Azure is going to be doing that metering, so you need to make sure that you have an Azure subscription that you can connect to. And you can also use the costing management capabilities of Azure, so you don't get stuck with a huge bill as well. It's perfect for folks that are like developers. Seasonal apps would be huge. Service desk tickets where chatbots could really deflect the application costs. If you start implementing chatbots and your ticket volume goes down, so that might be something you might be interested in using it for. So that's just some kind of interest there. Access and SQL connectors. So big things, 2 things here, right? You can now go to Azure and convert SQL and Access to Dataverse, which is huge. This was probably the most requested capability from Access users, is to be able to convert that Access and get access to Dataverse data, and ability to bring that Access data and data entry onto a mobile device. That's going to be possible real soon, which is going to be very powerful. With this new connector, you can now get the data in the Dataverse, where it can then be used to create powerful, obviously, mobile apps and things like that. The second thing is the API custom connectors is now in Azure, so there's a new landing page. Azure API management allows developers to build and distribute Power Platform connectors. And it'll be all homed in one location there in Azure underneath an API custom connectors location. Still no questions. I'm looking for questions. Don't have any questions yet. This is your chance. Please ask us lots of questions about the Center of Excellence, Power Platform governance, what you got there. So the entire licensing is a nightmare. You're not kidding. It's not easy to understand even what you were saying now. Use creation, apps consumption. If I have a license and I use premium connectors, my understanding is that all users have to consume my solution, have to have the same level of license. Again, with this pay-as-you-go, that would not be the case. I'll certainly open it up to other folks to answer this question as well on the call. Tron or Jimmy or anybody else. The key here is that they're trying to give you more options, right?
Yeah. So for using a premium connector, you would have the user, if it's running in context of that user, they would have to be licensed for it. So the cheapest license available would be that App Pass license or the pay-as-you-go.
I hope that helped the answer there. Yep, there's a comment about surprised universities don't offer degrees in Microsoft licensing. There are certifications though from Microsoft on licensing, believe it or not. It is. I think Microsoft's heard that loud and clear. Let's see what they announce this year as far as licensing. Hopefully they'll make it a little bit easier, but there's no guarantees there. But we stand ready here at Planet. If you have questions about licensing, certainly give us a call. We're happy to help you with your Power Platform license questions and see what we can do for you there. Let's see, we were talking about, so mobile app and bundling. So with mobile app and bundling was another announcement at Ignite. It also supports app nesting on mobile apps. So in the past, if you created an app, it was very single focused, right? Now you can create a whole hub and then have all those apps underneath. So if you have like 5 apps that accomplish a goal, you can put them all together underneath one app in your mobile app now and have them all work together like an enterprise set of apps or something like that. So that's pretty cool. The ability to streamline app delivery, again, being able to package these apps, port them around is coming here. They have all. The last thing is secure mobile applications from an enterprise governance with Intune. That's coming, which is really exciting to be able to protect these Power Apps all the way at the Intune level using things like conditional access. Very huge, obviously. And then lastly, Power Virtual Agents and Teams and chat in a channel. So bots can now automatically message you, for example, that like your expense report has been approved. It used to only be available in one-to-one chats, but now it's available in a Teams channel so that you can interact with that bot almost like it's a virtual team member. That's the very end of the session. Still ready to hang out for a few minutes. I want to talk about some of the next coming up You Already Own It's that are coming up. These links that I mentioned today, the Microsoft blog is your go-to place for all announcements and rollouts and things like that. The Power Platform adoption has all the Center of Excellence information as well as how to roll out Power Platform. And then the Microsoft Mechanics obviously is always a fun and informative, entertaining discussion about the latest of Power Apps updates and things like that. So still pausing for no questions. Oh, there was a question about Power BI workspaces. I know we were talking about Power Apps mostly today, and Power BI is in the Power Platform, so we'll answer this question. The question was, is it possible to holistically view the Power BI workspaces and reports? So, Power BI workspaces are governed pretty much by Office 365 groups, right? So if you're in that group, you're able to see those workspaces. So if you've ever been to Power BI, all of a sudden you'll see a ton of workspaces because every single 365 group or team that you're involved with, that is the back end of that, team is Office 365 groups. You'll see those workspaces, but you won't see the entire enterprise of workspaces. If that's what your question is, and your question is how can I see all Power BI workspaces across the enterprise? You have to be a Power BI admin, and then that would be the only way that you could see across the entire enterprise all the workspaces, obviously, in your Power BI environments. I want to thank Jimmy for giving these updates today. Jimmy has a world of knowledge of actually deploying these Center of Excellence, and he did a great job today, so I want to thank him. But before we go, I want to really talk about what's coming up in the next couple of months, because we've got a great set of You Already Own It's coming up, our office hours. Next month is going to all be about how to leverage M365 licensing and your license to minimize risk. So we're going to have James Province from our compliance team to talk to us about, all the capabilities, advanced compliance, things like that, all the capabilities, insider risk, compliance, communications, some things that I'm sure you'll learn something new about, how Teams handles DLP, which many people might not know. So definitely come back on February 24th for that discussion. We'll talk about advanced compliance and the licensing that supports that and how that works, and all the capabilities for advanced compliance and how to minimize risk in your environment. Here's the exciting thing. So we got data modernization coming up in March. Miguel Wood, who's our chief architect for data at Planet. The question is going to be, who needs data modernization, right? So, everybody has some kind of data problem that they're trying to solve, whether it's SQL licensing costs are going up because their EA renewal is coming up after 3 years and they want to look at managed instances, or their DBAs don't have the time to keep their, SQL databases protected and upgraded and all kinds of things. It's organizations trying to figure out how to build, agility into their infrastructures. It's really hard to do on-prem. So that's what Miguel's going to be talking about in March. In April, Planet now is offering a Viva briefing. So if you're not familiar with Viva, Viva is Microsoft's employment engagement platform. And so Pierre Eves and Matt Barger will be talking about, what Viva is and how it can be used in your organization. What does it solve? And I think we'll spend most of the time on that conversation talking about how it works with modern intranet. So if you're thinking about building a new modern intranet, this is the time to really focus in and hear where Microsoft's going for modern intranet and how it ties into Viva. So definitely, as well as modern intranet, we'll talk about topics, insights, and learning, which are all part of the Viva employee engagement platform. And then finally, this last one I'm really excited about, and this is where we're going to need all your help. We want to see what you guys have been doing in Power Platform, or anything that you've done in Power Platform. So we're really looking forward to seeing what you're all done. If there's, if there's something that you've created that you're really proud of, we need to be careful of sensitive data and things like that. So be careful when we talk about, if you want to volunteer, we're looking for volunteers to have this be a customer-driven type of presentation in the May timeframe. So start thinking about some apps, whether it be Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI, visualizations, something that you're really proud of and that you'd like to show. We'll have a little competition possibly if that's what people are interested. We'll keep talking about this over the next coming months, but we would really love to make this driven by the customers to kind of show off the things that you guys are working on. So start thinking about, something that you might want to present to us. We're looking for 2 or 3 different volunteers. Maybe we'll see how many we can fit in. And then if there is some time, or if we don't get volunteers, another thing we may be looking at showing folks is A lot of people are stuck with, Office 365 governance and how they manage teams, right? So some work that we've been doing lately with some customers is about deploying the Teams app template. So we would love to show you, kind of how that works and let you see that you can actually have a template that actually does requesting teams in an organized and approval way with using forms and customizing it and making that more automated, because I know a lot of organizations wrestle with, how do I control Teams deployment, but not shut it down completely and have a way to request the Teams apps and stuff like that, Teams and so forth. So that might be something we'll be looking at in the future as well. Let us know if that sounds of interest to you. We're always looking for feedback. With that, I'd like to say thank you. If there's a topic that you want to discuss in a future You Already Own It, please send us an email or contact your cloud strategist. With that, so we got some feedback on the interview style today, so that's great. We appreciate that, Andy. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next month in our Cloud Office Hours.